All right, hey guys, today we're joined with Dr. Kristina Douglass for our WPSU video series. She's from the Penn State College of Liberal Arts, the Department of Anthropology. She's an archaeologist that's really studying the human interactions with the environment and the impact on the climate. So we're happy to have her today, and she joins us and is able to share some of her research as we move forward in our series. So thank you, Dr. Douglass, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. Looking forward to having a conversation.
Perfect. So just as we get started, we're talking to kids, and we're really trying to inspire them. And what inspired you to get into the field of anthropology?
So you asked what my background is and how I came to archaeology, and really in anthropology. Really, I was just interested in all of the different cultures and places that I experienced growing up as a child. We moved around a lot. And as you can see here on this map, there are areas that are circled in white. Those are all places that we either lived when I was growing up or my siblings and I were adopted from. So we're all adopted from different parts of the African continent. I was born in Togo, which is this small country right here next to Ghana and Benin. And my siblings are adopted from Ethiopia right here and Eritrea. And then I have a brother also from Madagascar. And I circled Madagascar in green because in addition to having a brother from there, my family spent almost 10 years there when I was a child. So I had a lot of experience on Madagascar. And that's one of the reasons I ended up doing a lot of my research there. So this just gives you a sense of how much we traveled every couple of years moving to a new place, and a little bit of my background on why I became an archaeologist who works on the African continent. And so here's some photos of my family, just so you can see we're all, we have a unique family in that every member of my family was born and partially raised in a different country on Earth. So we're all different, but we come together as a family and we're all really, really close. But I attribute a lot of, my interest in anthropology to my parents and to the jobs that they had working overseas in public health and in development.
Pretty cool, pretty interesting there. I know that your research is obviously not done alone. Could you discuss a little bit about your lab or your team that you're working with right now?
Yeah, of course. I am so lucky to work with some really wonderful people, both here in the US and specifically in State College at Penn State, but also with a team of people in Southwest Madagascar, which is where we do a lot of our research. And so we have a team in Madagascar that's called the Murumbe Archaeological Project Team. And that's a project that we've been running for the last 10 years. And our team is fantastic. We have young people, older people, people from all different backgrounds and experiences in education who work on this team. There are about 25 of us in total that work together, and we do field work, we excavate, we work in the lab. There's a lot of stuff that we do while we're in Madagascar. So this is just a view using a drone of one of the places that I work in Southwest Madagascar, and it's called the Lambuara Peninsula. It's on the southwest coast, and it's in an area that's called Commune de Befandefa, which is home to 35 different communities of mostly of coastal fishers, but also people who herd cattle and who do a little bit of farming and gather some resources from the forest nearby. And this is a really interesting place because, as you can see, there are a lot of different habitats here. You've got mangrove forests right here that have a huge diversity of plants and animals. You've got the shallow kind of intertidal zone. You have the reef, the coral reef. You have these sort of sandbars and little bits of the dry spiny forest. And everywhere I work in Southwest Madagascar has this kind of diversity in terms of plants and animals. In fact, Southwest Madagascar, of all of this island, has the highest percentage of plants and animals that are found nowhere else on Earth, which is incredible. So Southwest Madagascar is a really, really beautiful place. It's pretty dry in terms of the climate, so it does not get a lot of rainfall. And the vegetation on the ground, aside from some of the mangrove that you see, the dark green in this image, is pretty much desert adapted plants. So you'll see things that look kind of like cactuses, even though they're in different families of plants, because again, this area has a lot of plants and animals that are not found anywhere else, but they kind of look like cactuses and that kind of spiny vegetation. And then you have the very beautiful reef system with all kinds of different fishes and reef kind of life. And here's a picture, again, taken with a drone of Andavadok, which is a coastal fishing village. And this is where the Murumbe Archaeological Project is based. This is where we have our field lab. This is where we do all of our project planning when we're about to go out and do more survey and excavation. So this is really our home in Southwest Madagascar. And Velundriek is the name of an association of communities in this region who have come together to collaborate to manage and conserve marine resources. So it's essentially a fisheries association, and Velundriek means to live with the sea, or the sea makes you live or makes you healthy. So it's all about people and the sea kind of being in symbiosis. And here's a picture of the Murumbe Archaeological Project team. Not the whole team, but many members of the team. And as you can see, here we have a lot of young people on the team, men, women, all different backgrounds who are here. And we are all team players and collaborators. We all engage in research together, regardless of people's background in coming to the field. Everybody has something to contribute. Many members of the team are expert fishers or experts at harvesting, shellfish from the intertidal zone. So they have a huge wealth of knowledge of the biology and the ecology of this region. Many members of the team are expert sailors and really know how to navigate these traditional boats. The communities that live on the coast here are called Vezu, which these are coastal fishing communities. And so the Vezu have these amazing outrigger canoes that are really hard to sail unless you're an expert like they are. So we're all scientists. We all come and sit together at the same table and work on these projects together. But we also do a lot of work here at Penn State in our lab, and that's called the OBT lab, Ulube Taluha lab, which means the lab of the elders of the past, because we're studying the lives of people who lived a long time ago. And so our lab here has a bunch of Penn State graduate students and postdoctoral fellows and other researchers involved in doing the work that's based using laboratory equipment and writing up results of our research, et cetera.
Awesome. Right now, as we get into, I know you have some things you want to maybe share, any current research, or, you're talking about your lab is basically in the field sometimes. You're in the field and your lab is not always a controlled environment like it is in a traditional laboratory setting. Could you discuss any current research that you have going on, or anything you'd like to share with us regarding your past research?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working on a bunch of different projects right now, both projects that are based mostly in the lab here, and I can tell you about a couple of those. And then we have projects that are based mostly in the field, and in the field meaning specifically in Madagascar at the moment, where we're going out every day and collecting information about the way people lived in the past and how they interacted with the environment in the past. So for example, when we're out there, we do what we call survey, which is to look in a really organized way, primarily at the ground surface, to see if we see remains of what people used in the past. So here on the left, you can actually see we put a little north arrow there to give us a sense of the scale and also the direction. So the arrow is pointing north. And you see here all of these little bits of white fragments here. All of that is marine shell that people used. Maybe they took out the meat from the inside and ate it or cooked it. But people also used shell for other things, to make beads or to make tools of various kinds. And it's pretty small, but there are actually also broken bits of pottery here. So these would have been pots that people made out of clay and fired in clay. And when they break down, you find little potsherds, they're called, bits and pieces of pottery on the surface. So those are signals to us that people either lived in a particular location or used that location for specific activities. And here you see our team member, Zafi, with his notebook and his GPS around his neck. And he's taking notes at the sites that he's finding as we walk these survey transects. So we walk these straight lines and we just look and see what we find along the way. And then finally, when we're excavating, we actually select a location where we're going to dig and see what's beneath the surface. And so sometimes it's hard to know what's going to be beneath the surface because, you know, things can get buried over time. And you might think that because there are things on the surface, you're going to find things beneath, but that's not necessarily the case. And the reverse is also true. There might not be anything on the surface, but there might actually be ancient sites and objects below the surface. So we have to do a lot of thinking about where to excavate. And when we do find good spots to excavate, we do it very carefully and very slowly. You can see in the upper right hand here, Beek, who's one of our team members and manages the project in Madagascar, he's actually using a paintbrush to brush aside some of the sand just to make sure very carefully that whatever it is that he sees there that he's brushing out can be left in position so we can take photographs, we can take notes, so we know exactly how we found it before we move it out of the ground. And you also see down here that we're using different kinds of measurement devices. So here, this is a folding ruler, using this to measure exactly where in our excavation square we're finding different objects. And so you see Odon here is measuring, and at the same time, Nadeau is taking notes about what it is we're finding. So it's a very collaborative, team-based activity. And then finally, over here on the left, this is another job when we're out in the field excavating, and that's called sorting. You have to sort all the materials that come out of the ground. So sometimes you get a big pile of sediment and soil, and you sift it oftentimes through something like this. So the bottom of this box has a mesh screen. So when you shake it, all of the sand and soil comes out, and what you're left with, ideally, are the objects and the remains or the little bits and pieces of animal bones or whatever it is that we're finding. And then we put all of that material in a tray, and we spend hours and hours combing through it carefully and sorting things into different categories. And then we put things into bags with labels where we write the date and where it was found. And we take all of that material back to the laboratory and do more analysis on it. So it's a really detailed process. Archaeology, oftentimes, if you've seen Indiana Jones or something like that, you think of it as being kind of this rough and ready, action-packed activity, but really a lot of it's just very careful and slow, taking the time to look through sites and to look through materials. So that's what it looks like in the field. So that's called excavation. And we do that on a routine basis. We do both the survey and the excavation. But we also do a lot of other things that don't involve removing things from the ground or from the landscape. We conduct interviews with folks and learn about their stories and their traditions. And that's called oral history. So we'll sit with elders in the community and other knowledge holders and ask questions about what life was like in the past, or what knowledge their grandparents and great-grandparents shared with them. So we're doing some of that oral history work today also. We're working on projects to reconstruct what the climate was like in the past. So on the one hand, we want to know how people were living, but we also want to know what kinds of conditions they were living in. We want to know if the climate was drier than it is today, if it was hotter than it is today. So we do that using different kinds of techniques, including looking at the chemical composition of certain materials, either from, let's say, a lake sediment or from a coral core, where we take a piece, of coral and we look at the different layers to try to reconstruct, what the climate was like each year that coral was alive, when it was alive. So there are a lot of different techniques that we use in the field.
Sounds like, a souped up version of a young kid using a metal detector for the first time and trying to find a coin or something underneath the ground. So definitely interesting, on that end.
Yeah, archaeology is definitely about discovery and trying to find things that might be kind of lost to us, either because they got buried and in a way got forgotten, or the knowledge got forgotten, or because people built on top of where people used to live. So there is a lot of having to try to discover what once was there. But archaeology is also really importantly about talking to people who are alive today and who have a relationship with a particular place. So even if we're trying to understand the way people lived in that place 1,000 years ago, it's really important to do that in collaboration with people who are alive today, because for one thing, this is their home oftentimes, and we want to make sure that what we're studying is something that is of interest and is relevant to people who are alive today. And we also want to do it really carefully, because archaeology, when you're digging up the ground to look for old sites, for example, you're actually, if you think about it, you're kind of destroying what's there. So we do it as carefully as we can, and as much as we can, we choose sites very carefully so that we're excavating something with a real purpose. But every time you remove those layers of soil, even if you're doing it carefully and even if you're taking a lot of notes, you're still, changing that context, that spot. So you want to make sure that you do it in collaboration with people and really carefully and with a real clear purpose and a clear question that you want to answer.
You touched on a little bit about environmental impacts, and climate change is one of them I know that we've talked about a little bit. Could you share with us some of the environmental impacts that you're seeing based on your research?
One of the interesting things that is happening in Southwest Madagascar is that the climate is changing, which we know is happening around the world. But what's interesting is that Southwest Madagascar has actually experienced a lot of climate change in the past. So the communities that live there have experience of coping with climate change. The climate change we're seeing today is definitely happening faster than it was in the past. However, there's a lot we can learn about how to be resilient and how to cope with climate change based on the past experiences of people who lived through it and whose ancestors lived through it. So one of the things that we're seeing happen today is that people are in many ways trying to use some of those ancient coping strategies. For example, in Southwest Madagascar, many communities are pretty mobile. They move around pretty frequently. They move around to maintain their networks of friends and family. They move around when they're looking for new places to harvest resources, whether those are new fishing grounds or new places they can bring their cattle to graze. They move around all the time. And we think, based on what we've learned from people's oral histories and from the archaeological record, that moving around a lot is one of the key strategies people used to deal with climate change in the past. So if your local area was experiencing very dry conditions, no rain, then you would move. You would take your cattle, you would take your family, and you'd move somewhere else. And to be able to move like that, you have to organize yourself socially in a way that makes sense. You have to build the kinds of houses that are easy to move and rebuild in different places, right? So people had a whole organization to how they lived that actually allowed them to move pretty easily across the landscape. And so today, as the climate is changing even more rapidly, people are trying to use some of those ancient strategies. But what we're finding is that the world around us is not always conducive to moving the way people did in the past. For example, now the economic system is a little bit different. People are trying to participate in markets and are trying to access, the global economy. And this makes it a little more difficult to do things the way they used to do it in the past. So we're seeing that people have these strategies and they've been willing to share these with us and this knowledge with us through their oral histories. But there are a lot of things that are preventing people from making use of those strategies.
We definitely have a lot going on there. There's no question about it. And, I think that one of the big reasons WPSU has partnered with us about this subject and trying to enlighten students and kids, in the area and around the area, is to get them interested in science and get them interested to the knowledge that there are careers out there that are just not in central Pennsylvania. They're more widespread. I think you've done a fantastic job of showing that today. So what advice would you give a student, a young student, maybe, elementary, middle school, maybe even high school, that's interested in maybe entering the field?
That's a great question, Justin. And archaeology is a field that actually uses skills from many other sciences and many other disciplines. For example, as an archaeologist, we use chemistry to understand how the environment has changed over time. So I gave the example earlier of taking a core from coral and looking at the chemistry within that piece of coral to tell us how rainy it was in the past or what the sea surface temperature was like in the past. We can reconstruct the climate using the chemistry of that piece of coral. So you might be an archaeologist, but actually really need to be trained in chemistry. Or you might be an archaeologist and really need to be trained in biology and zoology, because one of the things I do, for example, is look at animal bones that people left behind from, all the meals they had in the past. And we look at those bits and pieces of bone to try to then say what types of animals people were harvesting in the past. What kinds of animals were they eating, and how were they preparing those animals, or how were they interacting with those animals? So you might actually need the skills of a zoologist and a biologist. So archaeology is a really interesting profession because it attracts people that have many skills across the sciences. So I would say if you're interested at all in people and understanding how people have lived on the planet over the last several thousand years, then think, what part of people's lives are you most interested in? Are you most interested in how people constructed ancient buildings? Because then it might be helpful to have some experience in architecture or engineering and apply it to archaeology. In a way, archaeology is like a big umbrella. And if you have a question or an interest in understanding how people did things in the past, then within that umbrella, you need to build knowledge and skills from different fields of science and research that you can apply in archaeology. But in addition to that, I would say the most important thing is to try to find an archaeologist, to reach out to them early on, even, when you're a student, and to say, look, I'm really interested in archaeology. Is there a way that I could volunteer in your lab or at your field site to get some experience, actually doing the archaeology in the field? Because it's one thing to kind of imagine what it's like. It's a whole other thing to actually do it. And oftentimes, if you're interested and you show that you're committed, people will be willing to have you come and help out on the site, or get involved with a museum. Oftentimes, there are a lot of archaeologists that work in museums, and just to get that little bit of experience early on is really helpful.
That's great advice. And it reminds me of, kids in school, they'll always ask, why are we doing this? And it might not know the big picture of why we're doing this, because you might choose a career later on down the road that involves a little piece of that subject area that they can utilize to help them out. Or they might just remember one little thing about a history class that they remember, like, oh, hey, this is going to help. So that is great advice.
Yeah, archaeology is a lot of fun, and it's always nice to be outside. A lot of archaeology involves being outside and just observing the world around you, taking notes, taking photographs, talking to people to understand what the history of a particular place is.
Mhm.
It's a really fun profession.
Cool. So thank you. I really appreciate you taking time to, talk with us today. And I'm sure that, the viewers will be excited as well. And I think that there's great information for young kids, and that's really what we're all about, really trying to make an impact on, future kids out there that are going to be in your shoes, hopefully someday, or one of the other scientists' shoes that we've talked to. So really, really great advice, that you've given us today. So I really appreciate that, taking a little bit of time.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's been a lot of fun.